time for a little Ask Chuck.
Ask Chuck.
Enjoy the music there. As a high school teacher of international business, I am concerned Trump doesn't understand how tariffs really work. So writes, this is Miss Lori from Deerfield Beach, Florida. I know exactly where you are, North Broward County. It seems my students know, but Trump does not. His actions sure make it hard to apply the U.S. historical practices of global trade to what is happening today. Do you think this will be the new normal for the United States or just a Trump phase? You know, it's interesting. You do worry, like how much, and I know this is going to sound elitist and snobbish, how much have we dumbed down things for America? Like there's a part of me that is glad more people are engaged. You know, Joe Biden announces new tariffs and nobody's talking about it. So there's a part of me that actually appreciates the fact that, all right, Donald Trump shares these. So he sort of forces us to talk about it. So in theory, I hope we can serve as educators here. And in fact, you actually are picking at something that I think we all in the journalism space need to do a better job of, which is let's not assume anybody knows these things. This isn't what a lot of people do for a full-time job. You're a teacher. You have an opportunity to teach your class these things. Use the real news to explain things. And I think we as journalists need to do a better job of educating people of what tariffs are. I mean, one of the better explanations I saw came from Jim Fallows, longtime journalist who still, I think, has an association with the Atlantic. He's sort of semi-retired. But he talked about in his Substack, he referred to tariffs as essentially, it's like tariffs are a tool. You know, it's just like, you know, the police have a lot of tools that if, you know what hits the fan, they're prepared. But most of the tools they have, they're never going to use, or they hope to rarely use. And that tariffs are essentially that. There's something that you have. Every country can use it. If you need to protect an economic interest or a private interest in your country and your nationality, this is a tool potentially for it. Now, I think that history shows tariffs are bad long-term policy, but they can help you short-term negotiate. You know, perhaps it's a way to open up a market with a market that's closed, right? Imagine if the United States were in the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were going to negotiate until Bernie Sanders told Democrats it was a bad idea. Actually, a lot of Republicans were for it too, Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney, until Donald Trump told his supporters it was a bad idea. But the whole point of it was not creating a new economic free trade agreement. The whole point of it was to put a check on China and essentially unite Asia together. The sort of the Asian economies that are not China and band together to, frankly, coerce China into behaving ethically, because they don't really practice ethical economic behavior. So, you know, I think the whole idea of a tariff. Look, I have this thesis that what Donald Trump's real goal with this, and including with those that are around him, is that they eventually want to replace income tax money with essentially trying to get it this way, using some combination of tariffs and our own version of a value-added tax, some sort of VAT tax. You could argue this at kind of at the heart. There's always been this sort of fantasy among some on the right of a so-called fair tax, where a flat tax, everybody pays the same thing. In some ways, this is a derivative of that, you know, but it wouldn't, you know, maybe it's only on consumption. Essentially, move all taxation to consumption taxation. No income at all need not apply. So I think there's a part of this that is trying to see, do you. That's why the 10% baseline, I believe, is so important to them. He also wants to use that revenue as a way to, quote unquote, pay for his tax cuts when the tax cuts come and the Congressional Budget Office starts assessing what's the real damage to our debt, what's the real damage to the annual deficit. So I think there's a few things at play here that haven't fully been reported out or baked out. But on the issue of tariffs, you're right. I think Donald Trump only sees it as a you know, essentially a nail, and he's the hammer, right? And that's what you use a tariff for, when there are a lot of other ways that you might use tariffs. But the real goal is not to have them, right? The real goal is that trade policy is so fair you don't need tariffs, right? The real goal with somebody that decides to use their Second Amendment rights to buy a firearm in their house is never to use one. And I, at least the responsible gun owners I know, their goal is to never actually having to fire it beyond going to a range to make sure they know how to do it. And that's the way, probably to me, the best way we should be looking at tariffs. All right, Lori, good luck. In some ways, I think it's good that we have this real world example for you to teach from. But I take your point. Not easy. Ask Chuck. Assuming that President Trump's new tariff policies cause a recession in the United States, could the president use an executive order to postpone the midterm elections in order for the Republicans to maintain a majority in the House and Senate? Here's his background. I was a supporter of Trump during the first term. I've been a supporter of Ukraine and have followed the conflict the past 3 years. What I've heard from the president say about Ukraine has opened my eyes. I know a lot about current and past dictators. So he's getting worried about the U.S. going down the wrong path. Look, when I think about all these democracy questions, right? Could he do this? Could he serve a third term? Could he? The answer is no. This is where I think our democracy. Do I think? And you're going to hear a conversation later this week with a really smart person about what is a kleptocracy and are we about to become one? There are certainly some corrupt practices that Donald Trump appears to be greenlighting when it comes to access to the federal government, right? We've already seen it with Elon Musk and his relationship. There's clearly, where suddenly his businesses are getting early access. So, but it's our democracies is very intertwined. It's very local too. So I just the ability to just wave that magic wand. I'm not saying that there aren't methods if we were somehow in a hot war. Right? Ukraine had to cancel it. Speaking of Ukraine did postpone its presidential election because they got invaded. So, but my goodness, we were in the middle of the Civil War and we had a presidential election. So I can't imagine any president thinking they could get away with that without if Congress didn't intervene then when would this Republican Congress ever intervene? But I'm on that one. I know that I have a friend of mine in my ear saying, failure of imagination. You never know. I understand that you never know. And perhaps, the biggest jump in odds are from 0 to 1. So I guess you could say it isn't 0. I just don't believe there's any rational scenario where he could try it, but I actually think there's just no way that I'd like to think our democracy is mature enough that there would be such a uproar and rejection of it that it was not something that was even possible to do.